It's a beautiful day, so we got lucky. It's not pouring down rain. I'm Jenny. My husband Corey and I have built basically every square inch of this, 7,000 square foot lot that we have into, some sort of food production, whether it's for us or for our chickens. We also make compost and vermicompost. We start all of our own seeds, and I have, basically been doing this for about 4 years now. Tried many times before, failed. But then I kind of jumped down a rabbit hole on soil health and learned a lot about how everything ties together. And now it's become relatively easy. So it's been a super cool adventure. So I want to take you guys on a little tour. This is my front yard, believe it or not. So we're gonna start looking over here. We got the little perennial area. I've got some raspberries, tons of herbs, calendula. Got all of the stuff that you're seeing here has been here all winter. So all that kale, there's carrots, we got chives, all kinds of herbs down here as well. So I'm kind of lucky with our climate here. We get to grow in the winter time, and I really only had to cover it up maybe once or twice depending on the weather. So that was the whole front yard that we've got. I'll take you into the backyard now. And again, most everything has been here since the winter. So got a little strawberry propagation area here. Got more perennials here. So there's lots of strawberries, blueberries. This is a pear tree. Got some more strawberries. I love strawberries. We have lettuce. It's been here all winter. I use that plastic cover over it when it's like heavy rain or ice or snow. But otherwise the winter lettuce stays there all winter. Got more garlic than we need there. So that's pretty cool. Big raised bed in the back. Lots of, mustard greens. We got green onions. And again, it's all here throughout the winter. And I'm only now starting the spring planting. So perfect timing for the class. Little makeshift greenhouse thing with the baby plants inside. And then I got worm bins here. Let's see. Oh, can't see in my phone. There they are. Got our little worm bins here. So the little potatoes are growing in there, but tons of worms. Tons of worms live inside of here. And then it's like a little system where the, worms basically just make some compost for us. These are our little breakfast machines. They're excited because they get to mow the lawn for us right now. It's always their favorite day. We just let them out on the grass here and in this little fence. Keeps them out of the garden. And they mow the grass for us, so that's super fun. They think they're gonna get a treat. And then I want to show you the little chicken area and the compost area real quick so that you guys can sort of get an idea of the scale of it. So our little chicken area. We have 11 hens. They're surprisingly easy to take care of, actually. Well, I don't know if you can see in there or not. You see all the eggs. That's just from today. That's pretty cool. Good job, ladies. Good job. Okay, now to the hub, the compost area. It's my favorite. So we have 3 bays all built out of free pallets, basically. My husband built it all out of reclaimed stuff. Super easy. You don't really need the door. We just did it for aesthetics, really. So this is the new working pile. We got all the new stuff going in there. This one is the pile I just turned. So this was first turn. I don't know, it's too sunny. So it's pretty decent compost. I'm not perfect at it. I'm not a master yet at compost, but it serves our needs. And then this is the finished compost. in this area. So this is basically what we turn all of our garden scraps and kitchen waste, eggshells, chicken bedding into this. So, you know, again, I'm not a master. I do have some weed seeds in it still, but we're getting there. So that was my little garden tour there, so that everybody can kind of get an idea of the scale of things. So I'm gonna switch over now and then start chatting about how to do some seeding. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I kind of just wanted to start, you know, in the beginning. So kind of like a linear timeline of, you know, what maybe you would think about first, and then all the way up till planting stage. So I did want to talk about your, you know, the type of seeds that you might want to get. Something to keep in mind is we live in this world where conventional agriculture sort of is leading the race in, you know, home gardening as well. So like these mass produced plants that you buy at Walmart and Home Depot, you know, you get them home and then you put them in your organic soil and it doesn't work. And, you know, there's many reasons for that, but the main one is that they grow in a greenhouse on a fertilizer drip system. And then so when you get them home and they don't have that anymore, they're exposed to the sun and the wind and the cold, and then they don't have, you know, synthetic fertilizer drip every minute of every day. They shock, you know, they don't know how to take care of themselves anymore. So they, you know, basically they fail. So, you know, it's one of the reasons I started doing my own seeds, because the starts never worked out. So, you know, if you have like an organic garden center or something like that near you, it's going to be, you know, that's going to be your best bet for starts. I would think that, you know, if you are just starting out doing your own seeds, it's going to be best if you start small. So you don't do everything. Don't start with everything, because it is a whole world of knowledge that, you know, it takes a little bit of time. So maybe you start with your favorite things, what you like. Me, I like green beans. So today I'm going to plant some green beans. I've got some home saved tomato seeds here. And then I've also got some carrot seeds. I just wanted to show you for, you know, for reference, for like how different seeds can be. So I prefer to get things from local seed companies if I can, because the plants that make these seeds are basically, you know, used to the climate that I'm in. They're used to the environment that I'm in. They're used to the soil that I'm in. So you're gonna have better luck. But, you know, I do use other seed companies as well. Like High Mowing is a good organic online seed company. You can order just about anything you want from them. Johnny's Selected Seeds is another good one. They're pretty good on like hybrids and things that grow really fast, kind of production model food, but they do have a lot of organic stuff as well, which is pretty cool. Also, you know, you want to start with things that you like to grow. So maybe if you like beans, you know, beans are easy to start, so that would be a good one. A lot of people love doing tomatoes, so, you know, that's a good one. You do have to baby them a little bit in the beginning, but it's a good one to start. So again, you know, start a few types of seeds, the ones you like the most, and then, you know, go from there. Every year you could get better and build more. So that's my suggestion, is to not start everything, you know, start small. You know, and then we can get into things like, you know, what is an heirloom seed? What is you know, what's open pollinated versus hybrid, things like that. You know, so we can get into that if anybody's interested. So now moving on to the potting mix. So what do I start my seeds in? I make my own potting mix, but you can buy it. But basically you want it to be fluffy, light. You need it to have some drainage. That's the most important thing. Everything else you can fix. You can't fix that. So if it doesn't have drainage, test it out. So that's what this perlite's for, the little white stuff. That helps the drainage so that your baby plants aren't just sitting in soggy potting mix. So I like a peat moss and perlite base, but I always have really good compost in it, which is basically the food. I do mix in some organic fertilizer, especially in the springtime, or for something like tomatoes, like a super hungry plant. Broccoli is also a hungry plant. So it just depends on what you're trying to grow. So if you want to go to like one of those hydroponic stores and buy a big bag of soil mix, it's probably going to be too rich for something like lettuce or peas, because they don't require a lot of nutrient. But if you want to grow tomatoes in it, that's great, because it's meant to be high in food for those specific types of plants. So there's lots of places to buy seeding mix. Again, an organic garden center is probably going to be the best. I would start there, and then once you figure out what's in it, what it should feel like, then you could start making your own if you want to get like a bigger scale. It's not hard to make. You just have to know what it should feel like and what it should do. So yeah, drainage, most important thing. Nutrients is pretty important. So now onto container sizes. So I'm a large scale, so I have large trays. You don't have to get trays this big. They're smaller ones. So, I'd recommend, getting like a smaller one, or there's another thing you can do where you could plant, like this has 200 cells in it. They're very small cells. So each one is, it's pretty small. So you could do like, all your tomatoes, and then, your lettuce, and then, your something else, so you don't have to have one tray of one thing, So this is like the smallest tray I would use, the smallest cell I would use. So again, they're not big. They're less than 1 inch across. There's 200 in there. And then this one is the largest that I would use to start seeds. Now this is for something like beans, or cucumbers would do well in here as well. Squashes, something like that. Big seeds, usually you need a bigger cell. If you're starting a small seed, generally it's a small cell. Almost everything can be started in a container. The only thing I've ever found really that absolutely can't is going to be carrots or parsnips, because the part that you eat is the taproot. And so if you start it somewhere and then you move it, the taproot will fork and break, and then you don't get a carrot, basically. So everything else can be started in these trays or trays like them. There's many ways to do it, but I like this because I can start all of these plants. I can germinate them in the house, and I'm gaining a month in the growing season so that I can get a spring crop and a late summer crop. So in the same bed. So I put the, spring crop's already started, put that in. And then while that's just about getting ready to harvest, I've got the other baby plants starting already. And so as soon as you harvest, then you plant. And so you basically gain, 2 months out of the year. So you have a 2-month longer growing season if you start in trays like this. So again, we can go over direct seeding. If anybody's interested, it's pretty straightforward. It says on the seed packet, like it says right here, the temperature on there, how deep you want to put the seeds, how the spacing should be. If it doesn't say this stuff on your seed packet, then I would recommend going with a company that does state it. And it says a little bit about the variety. These ones are like really crispy carrots, things like that. And then if it doesn't say it, you can always look it up online too. If you're like, oh, I know that I have Cherokee purple tomatoes, but I don't know how they grow, then just Google it, and there's so many people want to share their knowledge. So it's on there. All right, so once the plants get to be, you know, a certain size, like something like tomatoes, you want to pot it up. So I start my tomatoes in those really small cells in the house, and then I pot them up into a pot that's this size right here. This is a 4-inch pot. So I put them in there, and deep. Again, you plant them deep. You know, tomatoes like to be really deep. So then this is what I would plant out in the garden, like toward the end of May here. So I don't put my tomatoes in gallon pots or anything like that. They don't really need it. In my opinion, they just kind of like wasted. You just have to dig a big old hole, and then it takes too much time. And then I've got this, I think is a 2-inch pot. And this is what I would pot herbs up into. It's too small for a tomato or a cucumber, but you know, anything like you need to grow it for a long time in a pot before you put it in the garden. But it's still relatively small, like herbs. This is perfect. So all my perennial herbs, thyme and rosemary, things like that would go, lemon balm would go in here for a little while before I put it in the garden. Generally a month, 3 weeks, something like that. So one more cool thing about using the cells is that you can do multi-sowings. So this is a beet transplant, but there are 4 beets in here. There are 4 beet. So I put 4 beet seeds in here, and that is what I'll plant out in the garden. So the whole thing together right in the garden, and then 4 beets will grow here, and then you just harvest the biggest one, and then the other 3 will get bigger then, and then you'll have another harvest. So, and you know, when you do this with certain things, it doesn't work with everything, but certain things you can plant it in that way, and then basically you have multiple harvests out of the same bed, which is pretty cool when you think about it. When you have a small space, it's kind of the best option. Peas you can do that with, spinach, parsley, all kinds of things you can multi-sow like that. So I am going to plant a few bean seeds here so that, I don't know if you guys can see too good. All right, so generally the bigger the seed, the deeper the hole, the bigger the cell, right? So bean seeds are pretty huge. Big seeds. So I'm going to put deep holes in here. So a good rule is you want the soil that's on top to be as thick as the seed. So if you have a very skinny, long seed, you barely want to cover it. If you have a big fat seed, like a bean, you know, then you want to cover it more. So I'm going to cover that with as much soil as the bean is thick, if that makes sense. So I'm just popping those in the holes. And then I'm going to cover it with more potting mix here. All right, and then we want to water it. And I would demonstrate watering, but you know, computers and all of that. So basically though, you want to water it a bit and let it sit, and water it again and let it sit, and water lightly, because if you say you have lettuce seeds in here that are very small and they're barely covered, and you just blast it with water, all your seeds are going to float up and wash off. So people do this a lot, where they'll put the seeds in there, and then they'll, you know, cover it a little bit and then water the heck out of it, because it needs a lot of water at this stage. But then they wonder why their seeds didn't germinate, and it's because your seeds aren't in there because they float up and wash off, or they go down a crack when they float, and then they can't germinate because they're too deep. So just something to keep in mind there. So I water when I seed a tray, I water at least 4 times very lightly until the water comes out the bottom of the tray. So until it comes out the holes in the bottom. So if you don't do that, then you have to water them every day until they germinate, which is, you know, just annoying. So if you don't have to do that, then don't do it. So that's beans. Okay, so then after I've watered, I put them in a bottom tray like this. So this doesn't have any holes in the bottom. And I stack them. So I'm doing like, you know, a lot of seeds at once because I have a huge garden and I have a farm. So I'm going to stack them so that I'm not, you know, dripping water all over the floor in my house. And then I just set them in my house somewhere nice and warm, somewhere where, you know, a bunch of air isn't blowing right on them. Most seeds will germinate, let's, you know, between 65 and 75 degrees. There's a few that won't germinate if it's too hot, like lettuce won't germinate if it's above 75 degrees. Spinach won't germinate if it's above 65 degrees. But that's more rare. It's more common for seeds to need the warmth. So tomatoes, 75 degrees is perfect. They will germinate at 70, but you just get less of them germinating. Whereas like peppers and melons is like 80, 85 degrees. They really like it hot. And so if you really love to grow peppers and tomatoes and eggplants and cucumbers and melons, I would recommend you get some little heat mat to set your trays on, because then you're going to get like 90% germination. Everything is going to go, you know. So but if you know, if you really want to grow lettuce and beets and spinach and stuff, then just germinating them in the house, just sitting there, is going to be perfect. So you don't have to, you know, worry too much about seeds germinating. And worst case, you know, you want to grow peppers and that, and you know, you'll get a few germinating. You'll get enough to grow if you just sow more than you need. So it works. It just kind of a little bit easier if you have more heat. Let's see, lost my place. Okay, so again, when they're germinating, you need to keep them moist. If you see the top of the soil drying out at all, then you need to water it lightly to keep it moist until it's germinated. So at the point where it is germinated, that's when you need to give them light immediately. So if they don't have enough light when they first germinate, then they'll stretch out really far to try to find the light, and then they'll basically flop over. So at that point, that's when, okay, once they flopped over, it's kind of like it's too late, you know, you can't fix it at that point. Unless it's something like tomatoes, then you can pot them super deep. So, you know, like I said, there's so many things to know. It's a whole world. But once you get it, you know, you kind of just get it. So, so what I do, I don't have supplemental lighting in my house. I germinate them in the house, and then I put them in a south-facing window, and I bring them outside on nice days, as long as they don't get fried by the sun. So I leave them out for about an hour, you know, and then I'll bring them back into the south-facing window. So that's kind of, you know, enough for most seedlings. You need a little bit extra for tomatoes. You know, I've done many tomatoes just this way, and they work okay. They do good. I've had 10-foot tall tomatoes doing just this way. So, you know, it's definitely possible. You just have to be on it, you know, with them. So if you don't want to worry about them, you just set up a super cheap little light right above them, and then you don't have to worry about moving them in and out or anything like that. They just sort of take care of themselves as long as they're watered. So at the point where they're, you know, little babies, they don't take much water. They just need, you know, just enough. So the top of the soil should dry out a little bit, and then you should water again. And then the top of the soil should dry out just a little bit, and then you should water again. So the reason for this is because roots need air just as much as they need the nutrients from the soil, just as much as they need the water. They need the air as well. Otherwise the plants like get a lot of fungal issues, and they'll rot, and they'll have all kinds of diseases, and not just when they're seedlings. They'll carry those things with them as they grow and when you plant them. So they're babies, you have to baby them. So, you know, once you get them established, you know, then they'll start growing, and that's when they start needing more water. So I have a big plant right here. This one is a baby broccoli. So that is ready to plant today. You can see its roots have filled up the little cell, but they're not sort of taken over. You can still see the soil. They're not root bound. This is the perfect stage to plant them. So I think a lot of people would wait too long, and then the seedlings become stressed. And like I said, you know, they carry those things with them. So if they're stressed when they're babies, they're stressed when they're plants, and then you're going to get a ton of aphids on them, or, you know, something like that. So basically, yeah, take care with them, pay attention to where they're at in their cycle. So this is a good example of the legginess when they stretch out to reach the sun. Because I germinated these in the house, they have this extra long stem. I don't know if you can see that. So when I plant this, I'm going to plant it up to there. So that part, all that's below here, this is all going to be in the soil. So that little leaf in the center, that's the one you need to have above the soil. Everything else can go below the soil. The only plant I've ever found that does not like this is lettuce. I don't know why, it just rots and dies. But everything else seems completely fine with it. So I've showed you the size of plant that, you know, is perfect for planting out. There's another one here. This is a lettuce. This is a good size to plant lettuce. You could go bigger than this, but I found that planting small is better. They like it better. You can see even now the roots are kind of starting to go around and round and round, and in another week that's going to be too far gone for this. So I'd have to pot it up into a bigger pot, like those 2-inch pots or the 4-inch pots at that point. If it wasn't ready to plant outside, like say it's snowy or whatever, you can pot them up into bigger pots. So there's always a way. So once they get to that point where they're just about ready to go out, that's when you need to harden them off. So that's something that I've been guilty of not doing well enough in the past, and it's kind of noticeable when you do it right. So you want to basically expose them to light, you know, direct sun, wind, you know, a bit of the elements, and get them used to it over the course of about a week before you plant them out. So I'm going to leave these guys in the sun for, you know, an hour, and then the next day maybe 2 hours, and then, you know, the next day maybe a little more, you know, just kind of getting them used to it. It sort of toughens them up a little bit, kind of like, you know, any other baby. You know, you want it to get used to the environment it's going to be in before you put it there. So another reason why starts from, you know, Home Depot or whatever don't work that great is because, you know, they've lived their entire life in a greenhouse. Perfect controlled environment, the perfect amount of wind, the perfect amount of warmth and light. And then all of a sudden they go into your garden, you know, with no synthetic fertilizer, scorching sun, wind, not enough water, you know, and then they just kaput because, you know, they didn't go through that little process. So yeah, again, baby them. All right, so we're gonna work on planting now. The planting part is not as complicated as some people make it out to be. It's kind of like about spacing, but again, that's on your seed packet. So it would say, you know, how far apart to put them. So this one says 4 inches. You know, so you can go wider than what it says, like bigger spacing than what it says on your seed packet, but not closer. I wouldn't go closer. A good rule is when your plants are 3/4 of the way grown, so like say I have a lettuce that's going to be this big. When it's this big, the leaves on the next plant over should be barely touching the leaves on this plant. So, you know, same thing with you know, broccoli. When your broccoli plant is 3/4 grown, like right before it starts making a broccoli head, it's going to be like this big. You know, they're big, and the plant next to it should be just barely touching it. So, you know, it's hard to gauge. Once you get used to it, then, you know, I don't follow the spacing on the seed packets anymore. I know what my plants are going to do, but, you know, starting out, I would recommend you follow the spacing, see what they're going to do. And then get a little closer as you can, but don't get to the point where they're like right up on each other, because that's when you get a lot of disease and stuff. And the plants need space to root as well as to grow their leaves. So the roots they compete with each other. And especially same type of plant. So like I plant, a good example of this is I plant tomatoes at 12 inches, which is really close. But I do one row on a 30-inch bed. It's about like that big of a bed, and then I plant basil in a line down the tomatoes as well. So the basil roots very shallowly. It's got kind of weak roots, whereas the tomatoes go really, really down. So they work together. So it's a companion planting, if you want to call it that. So I want to take you guys through a little planting session. Oh, here's a good example too. I almost forgot. So this is a tray of beets. I know the size of it is kind of outrageous, but remember I have a farm as well, as well as my garden. So a good example here is this one here. I'd say that's a little bit too small to plant. It's only about an inch tall, whereas these ones on this side, that's a much better size to plant. So this is perfect size for beets right here, but I wouldn't go that small. So I'm just going to get my little plants ready here, and then we can go plant them. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. All right. Bringing my little babies over here. So this little bed right here is mustard greens that is flowering because it's now springtime and they're done. So I'm gonna harvest them probably later today and take out the plants and plant this whole bed. There we go. So got my little broccoli baby there, or you can see him better now. Got the little lettuce baby. So the spacing is different for each of these plants, but I'm just going to plant these just so you can see how I do it. Broccoli, you'd want to go maybe 16 inches apart from each other. Lettuce is about 8 inches. And then the beets are about 12 inches because they get really, really big tops. So all I do, there we go. All I do is I just push the trowel in, rock it back and forth, and then just sort of pull the soil back a little bit, and I leave the trowel in it like that. Can you see that? Yeah. So then I will plant this. Again, the broccoli is going to go pretty deep. So I made a deep hole. So I put it in there, and then I push down just a little bit on the soil, not the stem. And then I take the trowel out. And that's it. I don't need to do anything else to this plant aside from water it. But I'm going to plant a lettuce. Not such a deep hole for lettuce because it's a very tiny plant. So I just tuck him in like that. Move around, push down a little bit. And again, he's going to get watered really, really good. And then we've got beets. Beets like to go pretty deep, but you can see that they have, not too long of stems there. So I just make sure that those little leaves in the center are above the soil level, and that's it. And then watering. So again, you know, you don't want to blast them. They're babies. Kind of a light watering. And again, I'm going over it multiple times. So I'm going to wait a moment. Let it drain in and then do it again. Maybe even a third time if your soil's dry. You know, another thing is that if your soil's dry, I would water it first and then do all this and then water it at the end as well. So you're really, really trying to get them in there really, really good. So the water is basically, you're making sure that all the roots are nice and wet, first of all. So they have somewhere to, you know, they have something to anchor to in the soil. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you water them really good, it will wash the soil down into those places where the air is. So like I said, roots need air, but they also need, pardon the dogs. But they all, you know, too much air will make the roots die. So, you know, a little bit of air is good, but it's more about the balance. So you need some air, you need some water, and you need some nutrients. If you have too much of any of those things, you know, then the plant's going to suffer. So basically that's it. These plants will grow. I'm going to water them every day or every other day, depending on the weather for now. And then in about a week, I'm going to start, you know, kind of like weaning them off of that baby stage. So then I would spread out the watering. So I would spread it out by about a day. So I'm going to skip a day. I'm going to skip 2 days. I'm going to skip 3 days after that. So once they get, you know, like after a couple of weeks, they should be on the watering schedule that the rest of your garden is on. If you don't do that and you continue to water them every day, give them a little bit of water every day, like is generally recommended to do that, then they won't get their roots down very far and they won't search for their own water. So you want them to be strong, you want them to be resilient, and that's how you do it. You basically, you know, wean them off of the water. Yeah, and I just use city water. So as you saw when I planted, I didn't invert the soil. I'm going to show you this. So I didn't bring all the soil back up above the compost. I basically, I'm going to show you one more time because I didn't explain it well. So when you put in the trowel, so I'm rocking it back and forth and then I'm pulling toward me a little bit. So that all of that stays down there. And the reason for that, let me find a harder spot. So the reason for that, there's a good example. So as you can see down here, this is like, that's the soil. That's the clay down there. Whereas this is all the compost mulch on the top. So I use the compost mulch on the top basically to feed the soil life. So if, you know, there's other reasons to use a mulch, you know, moisture retention, things like that. I use compost as my mulch because we have our main pest is slugs. And if I put like hay on here, you know, I'm not in a dry climate, so I don't need to, for one, but also I would just get tons and tons of slugs breeding in there. And then it'd be impossible to get rid of them unless I removed all the mulch and then all the soil would dry out. So I use compost as the mulch, but compost is the best thing you can use for your soil because it feeds all of the microbes because it's organic matter. And so basically the compost feeds the life feeds the plant. The compost doesn't feed the plant. You know, I think a lot of people are mistaken about how it actually works. And it's only like in the last 10 years or so, maybe 15, that they're actually starting to understand how these things work. So if there's no life in the soil, then you have to artificially feed your plants because they can't take up, you know, the minerals and the nutrients that are in the soil without the life, unless it's an artificially, you know, made fertilizer, one that's made for plants. But we all know that stuff kills us and kills the life in the soil. So it's better to you know, grow more life. It's, you know, the soil is alive. We should treat it that way. And this is how I do it. I just put, you know, compost on the top. We call it no dig or no till or whatever it is you want to call it. No till kind of has other meanings behind it. And so I tend to like the term no dig a little bit more. Yeah, so basically all we do is we just put compost on the top, 4 or 5 inches on the top of the soil. The only time that hasn't worked for me is there are spots in my backyard where I think that they filled in the housing development with subsoil. You know, nothing is really flat in nature, you know what I mean? At least not where we live. And so I think that they filled it in with subsoil and compacted it. And so it was basically, the soil in my backyard is concrete in the summertime. I can't get a shovel into it. It's not possible. So, you know, just proof here that you can change it. You know, you can grow in anything if you do it, you know, if you try to bring the life back. That's the goal. So we just cardboarded the grass, put compost on top of it. You know, but again, there was some compacted areas. So what we did there was we dug in some compost and then we just put compost on top of that. So we did compost and soil mix just where the beds were going to be. And then we put compost on top of that. So, you know, again, you know, so that kind of makes sense why I don't invert the soil, because if you bring the soil back up to the surface again, then basically not only is all the life in it going to die because now it's exposed, but also all the weed seeds that are in it are now going to grow. So a lot of people will till, you know, till or dig, and then they get this huge flush of weeds and they can't maintain their garden anymore because it's mostly weeds and grass. And so this is a way around that. So, and it's really, really easy. If you have soil you can get a shovel into, all you have to do is put cardboard on the top, compost on top of that, and then maybe don't plant tomatoes that year because they have to go through the cardboard, right? So, you know, plant lettuce and things like that. And then the next year you could do carrots and tomatoes and all of that. But, you know, super easy. Context is for kings. You know, gotta know what you're up against. So I am very happy to answer some questions. I'm going to switch back to my computer so I can sit and relax while we do that. All right, are we back?
Yeah,
we're back.
Okay, I hope that was okay.
Okay. Am I feedbacking from your phone? We're good? No, I'm good.
We're good. Yep, phone's off, not off, but in the other room. And
okay, a couple ways you can do this. Questions, we have the chat room if anyone wants in there, if you can, or we can ask questions with the video. Anybody want to step up for questions? Okay, here's one. What do you think the most important element is for gardening raised beds? Perhaps the layer of organic material?
I would say the most important thing is to make sure that the raised bed is in contact with the soil. So a lot of people would put a barrier, right? So you don't have anywhere to grow. So you're going to grow it on the patio, right? So you put landscape fabric in, and then your raised bed doesn't perform as well because you just filled it with this stuff that you bought, you know, sterilized in a bag, and then you bought it and put it in there. So it doesn't have worms, it doesn't have life, it doesn't have the things that will make it continue to go. So your first year is gonna be great, and then after that it's basically gonna die, if that makes any sense. So I would say making sure it's in contact with the soil. So building it right on top of the soil. Okay. And untreated wood, don't use treated wood.
And why is that? Oh, treated wood because of the chemicals?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Um,
But you know what though? I have found over the years, I've tried many different types of raised beds, wooden sides, concrete sides, all of that. You don't need it. You just need a pile of compost on the soil. You don't need wooden sides. It's really, honestly, they dry out faster with wooden sides. So if that's your goal, if you like get pouring down rains in the summer, say you live in North Carolina or something, and you get just monsoons in the summertime, maybe that would be good. But you know, here it dries out in the summer, and so I find I have a lot better luck with raised beds with no sides.
okay, awesome. How much time do you think a small time home gardener, let's say a few raised beds, needs to invest in maintaining their garden on a weekly basis?
Well, if we're counting, you know, harvesting and planting and sowing all the seeds and everything, you know, like a couple of hours. Like it doesn't take that long. Building the garden takes a lot longer than maintaining it. And again, if you dig it, you're going to spend a lot more time. So if you dig it up and you get the soil up in mixed in with compost, so you have soil on top and you have weed seeds on top, you're going to spend a lot of time weeding. But you saw how big my garden is. I just weeded the entire thing the other day, the whole garden, an hour, half an hour, like nothing. Yeah, there's no weeds now. You know, I just pulled out the odd little tiny weed here and there, and that's it. So, you know, again, it's context. If you know, if you just want to have raised beds, like you could set up a little irrigation system, you know, just a little soaker hose in each one, and then, you know, all you have to do is just water it, make sure it's weeded, clean up the plants a little bit if you got like dying leaves, pull them off, and then harvesting. It doesn't take that much time.
Okay. Another question. How much money do you think you save by growing most of your own food? Oh, I like that one.
Yeah, that's a big one. I at first I didn't notice the change, you know, because I'm still going to the grocery store, I'm still buying meat and dairy, and you know, and at first I didn't really notice, and then I started seeing the money in the bank account like stay there, you know. And so I started paying attention to it, and you know, when I think about, you go to the grocery store, like we eat a lot of vegetables here, you know, so you know, I would go to the grocery store and I would spend like $50 at least a week on groceries, just on the produce, not on groceries, but just on the vegetables. You know what I mean? And so, like, that's a lot. That's a lot. So I grow almost every vegetable that we eat, almost every one. I do buy some fruit, except in the summertime. And sometimes I buy mushrooms just because I love them, and I haven't taken the time to figure out how to grow them yet. Yeah, so I mean, I would say $50 a week at least, which is pretty significant, you know.
So when you say $50 a week, is that you have a family of what? I mean, that's, you know.
For
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
so that's, you know, I cook all of our food, you know. We don't really eat out much, things like that, you know. So I'm, you know, it's $50 is a conservative estimate, really, considering there's 4 salads a day, you know, there's another vegetable side dish a day, you know, so we have a lot, we eat a lot of vegetables, and when I make a soup or something, it's like mostly vegetables. But part of the savings too has been like, you know, like my gut issues are better. You know, like you get more nutrition out of the food that you eat. Plus it's like I can grow more, you know, than I want to buy, so I can, you know, really pack those vegetables in. You know, I'm like, oh man, I have all this mustard greens are flowering. What am I going to do with it? You know, I'm going to make pesto and freeze it. That's what I'm going to do, so I can have mustard greens in the summertime when the mustard greens struggle to grow. So, you know, I don't, you know, I've got basically I got a second freezer because I couldn't eat all my food fast enough. So
Okay, I love it. I love it. And then you went into your health, and that's actually the next question. I was going to ask this too. So you said you noticed that your gut issues got better. So you're talking some health improvements. This question says, have you noticed a marked improvement in your health since gardening at home? So, and why is that the case if you have?
Definitely, yes. Partly because, you know, you're eating more vegetables, right? So you're eating that fiber, and, you know, basically your digestive system is like functioning better now because you're you know, you're eating, like, I eat vegetables in every meal, you know. So that helped, just that fiber sort of roughage part really helps a lot. But um when you get into the understanding of the life in the soil, let me back up. So in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been some really interesting soil science going on. Basically proving, now that we have the microscopic technology where we can see these things and we can track them. So basically the microbiology that's in the soil is very similar to the microbiology that should be in our guts. So if you find a very healthy individual, you know, and you know, do a survey on the microbiology that's in their gut, we call it a microbiome. It's very similar. There's a lot of the same stuff that's in the soil. And when you take those things out of your gut, or when you don't put them in, right, then you get a dysbiosis. So you get this one gets way out of balance. You get way too much yeast because the thing that should be keeping it in check isn't there. So so they're finding out now that the biology that's in the soil, on the plant, in the plant, on us, in our lungs and in our guts and in our mouths, they're all the same things. They're all the same things. They're just in different quantities, right? Because temperature, moisture level, acidity, all these things factor in. So you get, you know, basically, you know, in the last like 5 years, I think it is, they've really started to find out that not only does the biology feed the plant, but it lives on the plant, it lives in the plant. And then just as a human mother will pass her microbiome on to her child, right? That's where you inherit your microbiome. It doesn't just magically appear. You get it from a vaginal birth, right? That happens too with seeds and from the plants. So there is biology inside the seeds. And then so it's basically like a little pack, like a little, you know, nurture pack that says, okay, these are what you're going to populate yourself with first, and then you'll create, you know, associations with everything else in the soil, right? So there's fungal associations. Most plants have to have fungal associations in the soil in order to live, just like we do in our guts. Like, they all work together, they feed each other, they work together. So the plant, you know, unless you artificially fertilize it, you know, it photosynthesizes, and it's something like 30 to 40% of the carbohydrates, the sugars that it makes when it's photosynthesizing, it puts back into the soil. So like, they were like, why is the plant doing that? Like, why is it photosynthesizing more than it needs to? So it basically puts those exudates, they call them, the sugars, into the soil, and that's what feeds the fungi and all of the other biology in the soil, right? So they even sometimes they'll put out different types of sugars when they need a different type of biological organism to bring it something specific. So that's pretty cool.
Okay, that's a whole nerdy conversation. I'd love to get into it. I love that stuff. Okay, I think that that's really the key. But let's get on to some other questions. As a novice home gardener, I may not pay attention to the ideal time to plant certain items. You mentioned ideal times for planting spinach, tomatoes, etc. If I don't heed those ideal planting times, will it greatly affect the outcome of what my home garden produces?
Yeah, definitely. definitely. Here's an example, right? If you put a tomato in the ground now, you might get a frost and the plant will die. There's no way out of it. You can't unfrost a tomato. Um, if you put something like spinach or cilantro that love cold water, if you try to sow them, say in May, and plant them in the garden, they'll just flower and be done. You won't even get a harvest, because it's too hot. They just want to be done. So they just immediately rise up to flower, and then you're like, what's happening with my spinach? It looks like crap. It's just doing what spinach does. It's not that you did anything wrong. It's just that spinach likes to grow. I sow my spinach at the end of August, and then it's producing all winter, all autumn, winter, and spring. And then it flowers in May and it's done. And I don't grow spinach in the wintertime because I don't need to. I have it in my freezer. So it's, yeah. So you don't, like, if you don't, it doesn't always say that on the seed packets either, which is honestly kind of sad because they just kind of base it on like a general estimate, and like the place we live, let's face it, the United States is huge. So you're talking about Michigan versus Florida. You can't even grow the same plants in those places. You can't, like that. It's not the same thing. It's not the same environment. What you would grow in Michigan in the summer is what you would grow in Florida in the winter. So, it's context again. So yeah, lots of things to know.
All righty. Okay. Next question from how do you turn the compost in the 3-bin system? Turning fork tool, or how do you turn it?
I use basically a pitchfork, but I use a short pitchfork because of where the compost is. It's kind of near the house. And so if I use a long pitchfork, it's kind of a pain. So I just got a short one. So I'd have more, more elbow room basically. And then in between the compost bays, my husband put dividers. So it's like a wooden slat basically that I can lift up out. And then I just chuck it over and then put the slat back in and then finish by going over the slat.
Okay. I have a question. So I'm currently in Arizona, and there's a home, Shannon's actually home, where they said it's I don't know, it's clay or whatever it is, but it's really hard. And how do you talked about the compost feeds the soil feeds the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit, what that means a little bit further? And then could you take a soil that's really hard, really challenging to grow anything like in Arizona and turn that into something fertile without a bunch of, having to pull tons of soil or compost into your backyard or front yard or wherever?
Yes, you can. It just basically in a situation like that, you have many options, but basically if you don't want to bring in a bunch of compost, then it takes longer. So you bring a little bit of compost, you kind of mix it into the top inch a little bit, and then you'll bring a little bit more compost next time, keeping the soil watered and covered and planted. So again, I mentioned those exudates, what the plant produces and puts into the soil to feed the life. So what I would do in that case, if you don't want to bring a bunch of compost, is I would plant a cover crop of some kind, like certain things like, like they can deal with clay pretty well. So what I would do is I put, like maybe, kind of rake in, scratch in like some compost in the top inch, if you can get down that low, water it really good, and then plant a cover crop seed. So something that produces a lot of biomass, right? So usually the grasses are good for that. Oats are good for that. And again, it depends on what time of year it is. So, in Arizona, you're pretty lucky with the climate. So, you'd probably be able to get away any time of year doing a cover crop. But I would then, keep the cover crop watered, let it grow up, and then, hack it down. At that point, when it gets like waist high, hack it down, mow it down, do something, but leave that material there. And then you could put some compost on top of that, or a tarp on top of that, right? But make sure it's watered, it's moist. And then and then put that tarp or the compost on top of there, and you'll be surprised how fast the biology turns that into soil. And then, so that, I did that in my front yard in a couple of places, and it worked really well. And honestly, those are the best spots that I have, is the places that I have cover cropped. But it's faster to do just compost.
Okay, and you talked about, like, depth. I saw that you mixed a lot of different things together, like what you just planted. There was the beets and the lettuce and something else. Oh, broccoli.
Yep.
Is that an issue? I mean, because you talked about companion planting. Can you talk about that? Is there a science to that, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much a science, really. It's more like observation, because things that work in some places might not work in other places, right? And if you don't have, really good soil biology going on, then you want to give your plants a little bit more space, because they need more, right? So they need to go look for more, and they need more space to find it. You know what I mean? But it's hard to say, because like I said, context is everything. So normally in my garden I don't plant random things together like that. I just wanted to show you guys how different each plant was to plant. Like that broccoli needed to go deep and the lettuce needed to stay shallow, right? So there's differences there. But normally I'd plant a bed of broccoli. Maybe I would put a row of radishes down the center, because radishes take 30 days. Broccoli takes 3 months. So, you have little baby broccolis that take a long time to go. And all the while your soil is sitting there exposed and doing nothing in the middle of the bed, because you got these 2 rows of broccoli. So I plant a whole row of radish down the center. The radish is ready to harvest right before the broccoli closes in its canopy, right before those leaves start touching. So, it's all timing. And again, with the tomatoes and the basil, they love each other because they have different sort of root zones. But other than that, they require the same growing requirements. Like they don't really like their leaves getting wet. They need pretty even moisture. They like a lot of nutrients. So they go really well together. But it's kind of trial and error. So if you start, you got, okay, so my tomatoes are going good now I've got my tomatoes like down, I know how to grow tomatoes, they're going really well. Then maybe on part of your tomato patch you would try basil, right? Because then the watering requirements are a little bit different. You have to do a little bit more water, because the basil respires a lot, right? It takes up a lot of water for basil. So things like that to know. It's trial and error and observation.
Okay. All right. I am not seeing more questions come in. Does anyone else have another question? Or Jenny, did you have anything to add? But while we are still here, any more questions? Okay. I don't see anything else coming through. Jenny, would you like to share anything else before you're out of here? What do you, oh, wait a minute. Oh, just thanks. So Jenny, okay, so what is your, let's talk about this before you head out. What do you think about systems? I'm a larger system. So why I love what you do so much is because I see this as a neighborhood change, a home-to-home change of how we view our health, agriculture, our environment, and completely a way to educate us about these things. I mean, this is amazing, and sometimes it takes a little bit for people to understand. A lot of people, I think, like planting a garden, this is like a lot of work.
What's that?
I hear that
I hear that a lot. People say it's a lot of work, but then I say, yeah, but I don't have to go to the gym or the grocery store.
Okay, well, there you go. You got some exercise, and it really is. So, what is your plan or for the future to expand things? Is it to expand? Because I would like to see this happen in all neighborhoods. I would like there to be classes and workshops in neighborhoods in whatever climate that is.
Mhm.
This is wonderful education, and even if it was, a few pots, it doesn't have to be your whole yard. Like
Yeah.
you're something. I think is so valuable. So, do you have any plans for any workshops, education, expansion? What are your thoughts there?
I definitely want to use this home garden for workshops and education. That's my plan. Um, that's why I'm going to set it up that way this year, right? Um, Last year I kind of did a lot of like production model stuff because I was experimenting um, planting styles for the new farm that I'm developing. So Corey and I have joined forces, if you will, with a coworker of his outside the city, and we're basically building a small vegetable farm out there. We're almost finished building. Production is happening now, so that's been taking up a lot of my time. But now that that's almost done, it's kind of time for me to focus more on the education part, which is my goal. It's always been my goal. It's how it all started. So basically I just want to hold workshops here, even if it's just virtual for now, whatever we got to do. Um, but yeah, I want to teach people how to do this. I want to teach people how to grow their food. And like, you can see it's pretty open back there. There's a big old school, like if people walk their dogs, like probably 20 families have walked by walking their dogs while we've been doing this, all looking at me funny. It's been great. But they ask me questions all the time, every day. How do you do this? What about this? All day long. If I'm out here, I get questions all day. So there's definitely a need for it. People really want it, and so I want to provide that because it is so important, not only for people to feel more empowered, right? And take a little bit more charge of their lives, like do something they enjoy in their yard. Instead of working 50 hours a week, they could work 35 hours a week, and then they wouldn't be missing that extra income because they're saving $50 a week on vegetables, right? So there's definitely a need for it, but not only because of that, but because it's the only way to, as far as I can see, it's the only way to combat this crisis that we have going on, where everything in the world is changing right now, and it's too hot to grow here and too cold to grow there. And like there's people, a lot of the farms in the Midwest right now are unable to produce food in the summertime because it's getting too outrageously hot. So we're going to see a food crisis. I don't see a way out of it unless more people start doing this, more small farms start happening. you know it's not only that, but it's also a way to combat that climate changing, like, because my soil's covered, there's things growing in it. That's the best way to do it, hands down.
I love it. I love it. All right, we have another question. I love this question. Container planting is my only option. Should I buy soil for the bottom of the container and then add the compost each year?
Well, okay, so the best luck I've ever had with container growing is when I plant straight into compost. That kind of goes against what all I just said about the seedlings, right? Where they need a lot of drainage, they need a lot of air. But when you're trying to, not have to water 3 times a day, because containers are hard to do, because you put potting soil in and then you water it and it goes right through, and then it washes all of the the little nutrients and things that you put in there get washed out, and then it dries out, and then you have to water it again and again and again, and so it continues to basically drain the nutrients, whatever it is you put in there, kelp meal, bone meal, whatever it is you put in there. So I like to plant straight into compost. So I do my seedlings and everything like I showed you with the drainage and the air and everything. And then I would plant those into straight compost. So as long as it's compost that can drain, then it's good. If it's something that, you know, if it's kind of compost that won't drain, then I'd mix in a little bit of perlite with it so that it can drain a bit. But there should be enough life in compost to grow almost anything. And there's ways around that. So if there isn't, right, so I would be adding compost every planting. Every time I use that container, add a little bit of compost to the top, right? Don't you know, don't dump it out and use all new compost. You don't need to. Just keep adding compost to the top whenever you plant something new in it. There's these super cool things called grow bags that you can order. So it's not a rigid plastic container, right? It's a bag. It's like a felt bag, and it can get enough air and moisture and water and drainage and everything, but it doesn't dry out super quick, right? You can grow potatoes in them, like all kinds of things. They're pretty cool. You can get them in different sizes as far as I know, and there's even like pretty colors, which is fun. But there are other things you can do. So if you have compost, right, you're planting into compost, you have enough drainage, the plant looks pretty good, not great, you can do something that's called foliar feeding it. So if you get one of those like little mini sprayer things, you can mix in, say, like kelp meal, which is really good. And then I also use the worm castings, so that worm compost. So I mixed in that, like a tiny amount of it, and the kelp, like a tablespoon, like a tiny amount in that little sprayer. You know, strain it out so you don't get it in the little sprayer, and then spray the leaves of your plant once a week with that. Just water and you know, kelp meal and the like worm compost, basically worm tea, sort of, if you want to call it that. So you can spray the leaves, the underside of the leaves especially, with that, and that will give them a little boost, more what they need, right? A little bit more life, a little bit more nutrients. And then you can also, you know, say once a month or so, you can dump that in the compost. So like water with that once a month, if that makes sense. And then you got all the, you know, you don't really need this soil if you're giving it those things. I've tried to put soil in the bottom of containers, and then it just stops the drainage. So then it kind of gets soggy, and then plants hate that. So yeah, but if you're going to do tomatoes in containers, get the biggest one you can.
All righty. Well, Jeni, I think that's it. Thank you so very much for doing this and really bringing this education to everyone. And we're looking forward to, you know, doing many workshops. I really enjoyed this today, as always. I'm so impressed. I've had the pleasure of getting to eat all that food, the eggs, the vegetables, your way of cooking. You feel different. The food tastes absolutely delicious when you have that type of nutrients. It is just not the same, you know, when you're eating food, you know, like you said, buying a seed from the, you know, Home Depot, whatever, it is different. So love this education, love what you do, want to see so many more people doing this, and kind of get my dream is to train the trainers, get a whole bunch of people like you in neighborhoods, and they get to do that in neighborhoods. And so I think it's important and key. And so we'll continue these talks. So
Yes.
with said, let's see here, Jeni. I have a little thing. Is there anything else? Do you have anything coming up that you want, a workshop, or where to buy your produce if people are in Oregon, or anything else?
Yes, we have. So if you're local, right now we deliver to Newburgh, Dundee, Sherwood, and Gaston, and there are pickup locations in Beaverton on Wednesdays. So right now all the produce is being sold through Food for Thought Farm. So you can find us on Local Line. That's our online store. And then we have Instagram, Food for Thought Farm CSA. And then the Facebook is Food for Thought Farm. So, you know, we have all of that going on. And then One Small Step Farm is like my home garden here. So if you want to follow along with what we're doing here, you know, with the workshops and things like that, that's One Small Step Farm. So I have multiple things going on.
All right, fantastic. All right, you guys remember that the class was recorded. A link, we're going to have a replay of this, will be emailed within the next few days. Stay up to date on future CACOON sessions and subscribing to atthecocoon.com. You guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Jeni, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay.